Welcome to Random But Memorable, a podcast from 1Password. I'm Rue, head of password manager development.
I'm Matt Davey, 1Password's Chief Experience Officer.
I'm Sarah, one of the founders at 1Password.
I'm Anna, the producer behind the show.
And we're the hosts behind Random But Memorable. Together, we offer up bi-weekly security advice, interview special guests from the cybersecurity community, and round up the latest security news in Watchtower Weekly. Plus, we may even play a silly security game or two. So sit back and enjoy the show.
Just as we get to the point where we're starting to compare airlines against each other, I think we should probably get back into the show.
Fine.
Look at me, I can stick to an agenda.
I come back to the show after 6 weeks. We have finished on time or early with every recording that you've not been on.
Right. Okay.
But please, keep us on track.
But please, tell us how to do it, Matt.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. We've got a packed episode ahead with plenty of stories, tips, and advice about the strange and ever-surprising world of cybersecurity.
Thank you. I love it. Oh, my God. Oh, he's pouting. It's so cute.
He found the agenda, though.
We
I finally turn up to a recording, and this is the that I get.
That's correct, yes.
We just missed you so much.
Yep.
I found myself 0% more productive by missing a few recordings, I must say. It did not help at all.
That sounds right.
You need us.
Right. Welcome back to the show, everyone. We've got a packed episode ahead with plenty of stories, tips, and advice about the ever-strange and ever-surprising world of cybersecurity. Later on, we're answering a listener's question about how 1Password stacks up against Apple passwords. And in this week's game of hack or hoax, let's just say the line between fact and fiction is getting blurrier than ever. But before all that, it's time for Watchtower Weekly, where we round up the latest security headlines that made us do a double take. So hang on, someone else did Watchtower Weekly while I was away. How did that work?
It was great.
Yeah, we drew straws.
We kind of bumbled our way through it, if I'm honest, but it worked.
Yeah.
It worked.
We made it work.
Right, so this week we're talking about ransomware. Not the old school kind that locks your desktop and demands Bitcoin with a grainy skull animation. No, in 2025, old-fashioned ransomware has had a bit of a glow-up. So ransomware attacks are evolving not just in terms of how malware is actually written, but in the ways that attackers tactically deploy it. The big trend? Extortion schemes that combine classic file and system lockdowns with AI threats, bargain basement ransoms, and even social media pressure campaigns. Our first story comes from 404 Media, and it's honestly kind of dystopian. A ransomware group called LunarLock. Oh, God. I'm not even rating that one. It's terrible. Sounds like a hippie commune. Right. They hit an art commission website that's not unusual in itself, but the group added a new twist. If the site doesn't pay up, they say that they'll leak all the stolen data and submit the artist's work to AI training datasets. Sarah, I'm curious, do you think that threat hits differently than just losing your files?
I think the losing your files part is always terrifying, and you can do that to yourself. I think the threat piece, for this one in particular for artists, I feel badly for them because I don't think there needs to be much of a threat. I think there's already a subconscious underlying fear that art is being uploaded without consent as it is, without someone saying it. Like, it's kind of like, oh, if you do this, it's already happening. Like, I think that's a bit of an empty threat. But I think of the healthcare places where it's like, we're going to put your client's data out there. It's really hard to want to lose face. If all your private DMs were made public on the internet, I don't know if people would be super excited about it. I think that's why those sort of, we're going to leak your stuff is usually more effective than just losing things.
Yeah, I do agree. Also, I'm sure some AI has already gone over it. But the idea of someone kind of forcefully feeding your art into generative models could be just as violating as losing your login credentials. And even if the group is bluffing, it weaponizes a real fear that your work might quietly fuel the next AI tool without your consent. So to be clear, LunarLock demanded payment from the platform in exchange for deleting the stolen data and restoring access. But the ransom note urged users to pressure the site's owner to pay up. And that ransom? $50,000, paid in Bitcoin, or Monero, naturally.
That brings us to our next story from the Register about a ransomware attack on an IT supplier from Swedish municipalities. Their systems went down recently, disrupting HR, sick leave, and incident reporting across 200 municipalities. But the weird part is that the ransom demand was just 1.5 Bitcoin, around $168,000. The average ransomware payout is around $1 million, so that's peanuts by comparison. Sarah, why do you think this group went for such a low number?
I'd have to say it's probably because it's easier to pay it. I look at the U.S. system where it seems to be very litigious, and it's usually cheaper to settle than it is to prove that you were right, and just the way the law works. So this seems like, again, another quick way to say, by the time they spend the money on a firm to come in and figure this out, and they get all this tracked down and they lock it out, that's going to cost us this much, or we can just pay these guys and have it back. It feels like they're trying to come in like a contractor. Like if we're going to say, okay, let's put in a new bathroom, what's the cheapest bid? Like this feels like another contractor coming in where they're just trying to make sure they're around the same price as it's going to cost you to go out and recover it, only they'll be faster.
Yeah. It's a small payout with big impacts. So whether it's a strategy to fly under the radar or simply underestimating what they could have asked for, it worked. Several regions confirmed they're dealing with data exposure, including sensitive employee info like medical records and injury reports. This is part of a larger pattern, and that brings us to the UK, where a major car manufacturer had to halt production after a cyber attack. The group claiming responsibility appears to be a mashup of hacker groups Shiny Hunters, Lapsus, and our old friends Scattered Spiders, who we talked about in a recent episode. We won't name every company they've targeted, but a growing number of high-profile British retailers are now in the blast radius. Matt, Sarah, when we last talked about Scattered Spider, did you imagine them teaming up with 2 other hacker collectives? And Matt, what does this do for sort of like name scoring and things like that?
Well, organized crime, which honestly, that's what we should be calling these, rather than like hacker groups or anything hyper-specific. Like this is crime that is organized. And of course, like I always think that these kind of teams are operating almost like companies. I bet that like they poach from each other. I bet that they, have job advert boards somewhere. Like I bet all of that exists. So yeah. And in terms of group names, Shiny Hunters is okay.
It's a little mid. It's not bad. I still like Scattered Spiders. I think that's good. But again, I think that's the shift that you're talking about, Matt, is recalling it organized crime. Like we need to really think about how it is and what it's doing and the differences, as opposed to trying to make it sound like a bunch of teenagers in their mom's basement connecting with a bunch of teenagers in their mom's basement in another city and then doing bad things. Like these are properly organized, legitimate businesses that are out there that are just in the business of being the online mob. And so if we keep treating it like small stuff, I don't think we give the proper credit, and I don't think we make it as easy to talk about when you're targeted by these groups.
Yeah. I think the general news and their stock images probably have a lot to answer for here in our view of these groups, because when it was the mob, there were photos of guns and crates and evil-looking costumes. And then when they talk about hacker groups, it's spindly little teenagers in hoodies. Like, I think one is probably a lot closer to the other these days. So, meanwhile, in the US, a ransomware attack on the Pennsylvania Attorney General's office has shut down nearly 200 legal cases. So the courts had to send out delay notices on all of those cases because lawyers couldn't access witness information, file documents, or even respond to legal deadlines. That's what makes ransomware feel so different now. It doesn't just steal data, it's really disrupting real-world institutions. Whether that's a legal system, a local government, car manufacturing line, all of these in ways that we can really see and feel in the real world.
I think that's just, it comes down to, again, calling it organized crime so that we have that real, like, it's not just a minor impact. It's not just you couldn't do a thing. It's an actual thing.
Yeah, because it is extortion. It is very similar to the real mobs and all that kind of thing.
Well, and things like this, like you have a right to due process and all of that. And so if it's not a timely appearance in front of the judge and all this kind of stuff, like you can get your cases dismissed, and then you can end up with people who are committing violent crimes being released on the streets. Like it's affecting all of the everything. And it's just really unfortunate that we can't find ways to just have proper systems where you can just get stuff done without having to worry about what's that underlying level of disruption.
I think that the real world impact of these things is such a departure from where we've been with cyber attacks in the past. And I think that it makes it feel different. Like these are still the same types of tactics that we've seen deployed for a long time now, but with different ramifications. And I think that it's going to connect with people in a way that purely cyber attacks with cyber outcomes may not have resonated with people before. And I think that that's also sort of an interesting differentiator for all of this.
All right. Well, with that, I think it's time to move over to our weekly segment that's new, that I've really been enjoying. It's our new crash course segment. And today we're going to talk about zero trust. You might have heard about this buzzword a whole bunch. It's very popular with our security marketing group. It's called zero trust. So what does that actually mean? At its core, zero trust is a very simple philosophy. Don't automatically trust anything or anyone. Always verify first. Think of it like guarding a top secret lab. If someone walks up and says, "Hey, I work here, but I forgot my badge. Can you let me in?" You wouldn't just hold the door open. You'd stop, you'd check their ID, maybe call someone inside to confirm. In other words, you would verify before you trust. That's how zero trust works in cybersecurity. Even if someone's already on the company network or logged in before, that doesn't mean they should get a free pass for forever. Systems are designed to keep on checking. Are you still who you say you are? Is your device still secure? Do you really need to access the specific thing right now? And then that ties over to a related idea, the principle of least privilege. Matt, do you want to explain that one?
Sure. So least privilege just means giving people devices and apps the minimum access that they need to do their job and nothing extra. Think of it like giving someone a key that only opens the rooms that they actually need to enter, not the entire building. Sometimes it means limiting when access is allowed. For example, you might be signed out of a service after a while, so you have to then log back in. That way, access isn't unlimited, it's controlled and constantly re-verified. So put it all together and you've got this zero trust mindset. Don't assume and always check. And if you want to go deeper, we actually interviewed 2 zero trust experts on the podcast last year. Find that episode linked in the show notes.
Nice. I think that's like just for basic stuff. I think for listeners in general, like I always look at it when I'm logging into a new app or a service and they ask me my birthday. Like, do they really need to know when my birthday is? Absolutely not. So the problem with that and what I've started using 1Password for is I end up with a whole bunch of random birthdays and I can't remember what my birthday is on this site. I know 2 months ago I had Google sending me emails to say happy birthday, and I had confetti on my calendar and I couldn't figure out what it was, but it's because I told Google the wrong date for my birthday because I didn't want to, like, it doesn't need it. It can ask me if it needs to know my birthday, but it doesn't need to know how old I am to access a spreadsheet. It's fine. I'm over 19. Let's get on with our cellular coding and all of that kind of good stuff.
It's interesting. I feel there are ways to do productivity-based access and like give me enough access, but like not have it so that it's constantly oppressive. And I think it's such a hard balance.
I think that goes back to the developers, though, where it's really on the people who make the software to design software that allows for all of this gated access. You either have super admin access where you can do anything and access everything and destroy the entire world, or you can send an email. There's no in-betweens. There's no set up any routing. There's no anything. Like, and having that lack of granular control access, that's really something that I've been looking for when I'm looking at new software to bring in as a business to say, is this something where I can add extra pieces? Is this somewhere I can add extra something else? Or is this just an on or off type of thing? Because again, as we've scaled the company and we have all of this information, it's just really hard to know, do I need access to all of this for every minute of every day? I don't. So how do we just do that?
Oh, 100%.
All right, it is now time for our guest interview. You've probably heard of cyber warfare and seen reports on the news of factories and power grids being taken offline, but have you ever wondered how it actually works? Well, I sat down with an expert to understand what hacktivists and geopolitical hackers really get up to. But before I get into it, I just wanted to make a quick disclaimer. You're going to hear Hayley reference various nations and conflicts throughout this discussion. We just want to remind our listeners that the views and opinions expressed by our guests don't necessarily represent the opinions of 1Password. Now, with that out of the way, let's jump in. Today's guest is Hayley Benedict, a cyber intelligence analyst at RANE, a global risk intelligence company. Hayley focuses on the intersection of cybersecurity and geopolitics and has researched everything from election interference to hybrid warfare tactics. She is also the co-author of The Role of Cyber in Geopolitics in 2025 and Beyond, a recent report on how state and non-state actors are shaping the future of digital conflict. Hayley, I am excited to have you on the show today and to dig into the evolving world of cyber conflict. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So I want to start sort of at the beginning here. For people who aren't familiar, what is risk intelligence? Let's just start there.
Yeah, so risk intelligence can mean a lot of different things, but generally speaking, it's helping organizations anticipate, monitor, and respond to emerging threats. So what we do is kind of focus on geopolitical, security, cyber, and legal, regulatory, and compliance risks. And we use open source intelligence, and we offer open source intelligence tools to help provide forward-looking analysis on all of those topics.
Ooh, tell me more about open source intelligence. Is it any more fancy than just freely available research that's been published out in the world?
That's pretty much what it is. And that's a good way to sum it up, but we're kind of compiling a lot of that information into an easily accessible front. And then we're building upon those sources to provide forward-looking analysis, talking about what is this trend that we're seeing with this minute development that was flagged in the OSINT or open source intelligence world, and where is it going? What does it mean for your organization? And what can you do about it? How can you best prepare?
Nice. So what drew you to the cyber intelligence field in the first place?
So I actually have kind of a weird, interesting start to all of this. I don't have a specific education in cyber intelligence. My background is in geopolitics, and I really got into the cyber aspect of it when I was studying the Balkans, and specifically the Balkans and the international environment in the region. So a lot of that did focus on humanitarian intervention and international aid, and what can we learn from the Bosnian genocide. My project focused on Russian involvement in the Balkans. So to prepare for that, I met with ambassadors of former Yugoslavia states, and then I went to the Balkans and I met with various government leaders, nonprofits and NGOs, members of the opposition in some states. And I realized that so much of my preliminary independent study research from college was kind of wrong. And it was Russian propaganda and Russian disinformation that had kind of seeped its way into these sources that I was using as a student preparing for this project. I just thought it was so fascinating looking at how Russia uses electronic forums for influencing populations and promoting that propaganda and those narratives. Then when I graduated from college and I went to grad school, I was still kind of focused on the humanitarian stuff, but I really did lean into that Russian disinformation ecosystem and the influence operations component, and ended up taking a cybersecurity class and then doing my capstone on Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election. So that's kind of what helped me get the job that I have now. And since then, I've really expanded and added onto that knowledge of Russian disinformation to just look more broadly at Russian threat actors and hacking as a whole. And then what else do we see from other nation-state actors and then other types of cyber threat actors?
Wow, that is a fascinating journey into your current role and into the industry. I wouldn't have predicted it ahead of time. I wouldn't have predicted that as your answer. So we often hear that cyber is the new battlefield. Is that true? Like, how true do you think that is? And what does it actually mean in practice and in the real world?
So I don't know if I would say that cyber is the new battlefield. I think that it has the capability to be a battlefield, certainly. And we're kind of seeing that play out a little bit more than we did before. I look at it, though, more as a strategic tool alongside conflict when we're talking about it in that context. So in the past few years, we've seen a little bit of a flare-up in global conflict, and that's played out on actual battlefields. And so cyber has been a strategic tool in those contexts. So if you look at Ukraine, Russia has used cyber attacks to repeatedly target Ukraine's power grids, telecommunications networks, and energy supply systems, wanting to cause disruptions, and especially during winter when energy dependency is really high. And then if you look at the most recent conflict between Israel and Iran, the 12-day war, Israel, or pro-Israeli hacktivists that call themselves Predatory Sparrow in English, they targeted Iran's bank SEPA and rendered its systems inoperable, and it's the largest state-owned bank that provides services to Iran's security forces. And then they also targeted a really massive cryptocurrency exchange, Novitex, and they took currency largely from wallets that were linked to Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And they completely removed those funds from circulation, and that added to their strategy of trying to harm the Iranian regime. So it really served as a strategic tool, and I think it can be an aspect of the battlefield and has the potential to be maybe a new battlefield where things exclusively play out on cyberspace, but more often than not right now, it's supplementary rather than the main show, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. From those incidents that you just mentioned, was there any one in particular that really stood out to you?
Yeah, I would say that the Israeli attacks on Iran are always really interesting because this is technically a hacktivist organization. It's pro-Israel, and they mainly target Iran, but its capabilities are really impressive for a hacktivist organization, and there's a lot of indications that show that this could actually be a state-sponsored actor, but it's just operating under the guise of hacktivism, which we're seeing more and more of today in the geopolitical realm, in the cybersecurity realm. These hacktivists, which are just ideologically motivated hackers, we're seeing them align themselves more and more with state interests. Either that's on their own accord, they just really believe in what their state is trying to promote here, or it's that they are operating on behalf of the government and just using that as a way to maintain plausible deniability and avoid pushback and avoid retaliation for the activity that they're carrying out. So when we think about hacktivism in a more traditional sense, we think about website defacement. They'll post a message on their target's website saying you've been hacked and here's why, or something like that. Or we're talking about a distributed denial of service attack, DDoS attack, where these are really typically only lasting like a few minutes. Some cases they last a few hours, but they're pretty low level and they just cause really temporary disruptions to websites usually. So what we've seen now with this group, Predatory Sparrow, the pro-Israeli group, what they use is beyond just distributed denial of service attacks. And with that attack on Bank SEPA, they destroyed the data, is what they said. And so that rendered systems inoperable, halted payment systems, caused a run on all banks, and that includes Iran's largest bank, Bank Melli. I might be mispronouncing that. And it even caused a little bit of a crash in Tehran's stock exchange. So it's kind of a good example of what an outsized impact a cyber attack can have. It's kind of this ripple effect where one impact causes one thing, causes another thing. And data wiper malware is not something we usually see with hacktivists. So it's really interesting that this supposed hacktivist group would have such advanced capabilities. But then at the same time, it's Israel, and Israel has, generally speaking, really advanced capabilities. Everybody who's an Israeli citizen is serving in the military, so they might be getting training in that front. So it really could be an independent actor, but probably not. So I think that whole dynamic of state-sponsored actors and hacktivists is really interesting.
Oh, that is really interesting. Is there a misconception about cyber warfare that you think is fairly common that you wish more people understood?
Kind of. So I think the term cyber warfare in itself is kind of misleading. I think that people really like to use it, and it's a term that gets thrown around a lot. It's a great buzzword, but to me, cyber warfare has a really high threshold. So what I consider cyber warfare would be cyber attacks that cause actual damage to property or that harm people. Or I think if you're talking about cyber warfare, it could be included in the context of conflict as a strategic goal, but it's the actual main event, again, isn't really the cyber battlefield. It's the actual battlefield when you're talking about it in terms of conflict. So an example of what I mean is, so Predatory Sparrow, that same group that went after Iran's Bank SEPA and Novitex, in 2022, it also took responsibility for a cyber attack on Iran's Kuzek Steel Company and 2 other companies, and then it caused a facility fire and then temporarily disrupted factory production. So I think that the disruption, which is what we usually see associated with cyber warfare, I don't think it's the disruption that would constitute cyber warfare. I think it's the actual facility fire and the property damage that means that that would be an example of cyber warfare. And I think another example would be on the part of Iran. In 2020, Iran targeted Israeli water systems and then tampered with chlorine levels. It was thwarted, but if it had been successful, then it would have poisoned the water supply. It could have sickened civilians. And so if something like that had happened, it's harm to actual people. So I think that would have constituted as cyber warfare. But then if you look at some of these attacks on water systems from Russia and Russian threat actors that we've seen recently kind of in Norway, Poland, Texas, we're talking about water that's overflowing is what the impact was there. And I think that people are quick to say that, oh, it was Russia and it was Russia targeting adversaries. That means that it must be cyber warfare. But I don't think that that would be cyber warfare. That's mainly just trying to cause chaos, trying to cause disruptions. Does that make sense?
Gotcha. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I want to go back to the concept of state sponsorship for a minute. How do governments work with hackers in general? Like, are there attackers that are employed full time, or do you think it's more of a mercenary type setup?
I think it's both, and it depends. So if you think about cyber risk broadly, there are kind of 3 buckets that I like to put things into, put threat actors into. So you've got your nation state hackers, you've got cyber criminals, and then you've got hacktivists. And we've already mentioned there can be overlap in some cases. But some countries, what they do is they have these cyber teams that are baked into military roles. So this is the case, Russia, Israel, Iran. These are military personnel, and their full-time job is to carry out offensive cyber operations. So that would be our first bucket, nation-state cyber operations. But then some states also cooperate with cyber criminals. So if you think about Russia, what they'll sometimes do is outsource their operations to cyber criminals, and government projects wouldn't be the cyber criminals' main job, really. They have their own thing going on where they're carrying out financially motivated cyber attacks all on their own without any government oversight or participation. This is just their own operation they have going. And then Russia will sometimes hire them for their services or split the profits with them or offer them immunity in exchange for their services. So that would be, I think, more of a mercenary situation or a contract situation. And in China, too, it's really interesting because they'll call on legitimate companies, legitimate IT or tech companies to do this work, like a contractor situation. And then I think hacktivism, like I said, it's really interesting where sometimes you have independent actors carrying out this kind of stuff all on their own accord because they're ideologically motivated and they believe in it. Or in some cases, they're aligned with states. So like pro-Palestinian hacktivists, many of these groups really are aligned with the Palestinian cause, independently carrying out this type of activity. And then others are operating either under the direction of Iran or they're just Iranian nation-state threat actors pretending to be hacktivists to maintain that plausible deniability.
When hackers are going after infrastructure or public services, what's the general playbook that you've seen? Are there common techniques, or does it vary pretty wildly?
So I would say that it varies based on what the end goal is, but generally speaking, there's some main steps that they all pretty much follow. So, I mean, I think that any cyber attack would start with reconnaissance. So they're gathering intel on their target's network, their systems, their personnel. They might look for names of employees, be trying to figure out what the organizational structure is, who can they target at that company that would give them what it is that they want. and give them that kind of access. And then they would need to actually get that initial access. So that's step 2. And this could be through phishing attacks, targeting unpatched vulnerabilities, or credential stuffing attacks, or just using weak credentials in general, looking for leaked credentials. Or in some cases, like we've seen more often now, is social engineering, where they're just calling employee help desks saying they're an employee who's locked out. Can you please help them get in? These are tactics we're seeing more and more of, but it doesn't have to be super complicated, but that's how they are getting that initial access. And then once they have that access, what they do is they move laterally to gain kind of a deeper foothold into the networks, find the critical systems or whatever data it is that they're looking for. But if they're targeting critical infrastructure, they're probably looking for operational technology or control systems. And then they might deploy malware or lay dormant malware that they can activate remotely at another time, or launch a DDoS attack and try and take systems offline, or deploy encryption malware if they're carrying out a ransomware attack and extort victims. This is kind of where it gets to. It depends on what their end goal is, but those initial steps are typically a general playbook that threat actors would follow.
Do you see state-backed cyber teams usually given a list of specific targets, or are they encouraged to just sort of hit anything that could hurt the enemy?
So this is, again, really dependent on what the actual goal is of the operation. So if it's espionage, say it's Russia conducting espionage against the United States, they're probably going to be targeting someone or something specific. But if it's aiming to cause chaos or disruptions more broadly, if that's the end game, like it is sometimes for Russia, then it might be opportunistic. Iranian threat actors tend to be pretty opportunistic in their cyber attacks. And when they're looking at opportunistic cyber attacks, one thing that I like to always flag is water systems, because they tend to be locally managed. And this means that they're more likely to face resource constraints. And resource constraints mean they might be devoting less resources to patching systems and maintaining stringent cybersecurity standards, or they might have legacy equipment that can't be patched or updated anymore. So unless they're really trying to do something like go after a major system and do something really big to send a message, they're probably opportunistically trying to find where the vulnerabilities are, casting a wide net, and then deploying attacks where they can get in.
I want to go back for a minute to something you said in sort of your journey into this industry, around how you discovered that your report suffered from misinformation. And I want to talk about sort of the breakdown between disruption, data theft, or something like you experienced, which is sowing doubt or mistrust. Like, what do you think are sort of the primary areas where attackers are investing their time and their talents into all of this stuff versus some of the other areas?
Yeah, so there are a lot of different ongoing operations that are going to be happening simultaneously, and they're all going to have different goals. I would say, though, that when I'm going through this information on a day-to-day basis and tracking these trends and these operations, what I see the absolute most of is definitely data theft, because this is something that is less likely to have any kind of retaliation for. I mean, there will be denouncement of the attack and they'll flag it as a security risk, but data theft is most common. You see the most of it, but at the same time, this is maybe something that's easier to do than disrupt. To gain control over industrial control systems is a little bit harder than it is to exfiltrate data. And then sowing doubt or mistrust, this is something that is going on all the time. Online, on social media, there are always nation-state influence operations happening simultaneously, and they might not always be discovered, or they might not always be impactful or gain a lot of traction, but they're happening at the same time that this data exfiltration and these disruptions are. But I'd say that probably the most resources go into data theft, because this can help inform cyber attacks that will cause disruptions. So that's the reconnaissance aspect. That can be data theft. And it's also just standard intelligence collecting intelligence on your adversaries, knowing where you stand with them, what information might they have on your spies, what policies are going to impact you. This is just baseline intelligence collection and espionage that's always going on, and I think at a much higher level than people realize, or at a much higher level than some of their other cyber operations. But I'd say that nation-state actors, if there is a political or ideological driver, the goal could be disruption, and they're more likely to deploy those disruptive cyber attacks if there's a strategic end. Like maybe they're trying to harm economic prospects by disrupting supply chains or manufacturing capabilities. This might be where a nation state would look at a strategic port or a pipeline. But for Russia, for example, a lot of times they are just trying to sow doubt and mistrust. And that can, while that's a major component of their information operations, it's also a component of their disruptive cyber attacks, or at least their attempts to cause disruption. So if we look at what happened last year in Romania, a Russian influence operation was conducted on TikTok, and intelligence agencies in the region attributed the unexpected victory of a pro-Russian candidate to this influence operation that happened online. And what we also saw there were a lot of attempted cyber attacks on Romanian networks before and after the election, just to kind of make people nervous or to gain information that could be used. So you always kind of hear this risk about elections, how there could be all kinds of cyber attacks leading up to them because they want people to be nervous and stay home, and they want to reduce faith in democratic institutions more broadly. And when people talk about cyber attacks, it can get really doomsday really fast, thinking about the potential risks of water systems being poisoned or blackouts. And even if we don't have any good examples of that in the United States where we can point to saying, oh, this happened and therefore we must be afraid of it, it's still a risk that's underlying, and it's a risk that Russia can use to their advantage and play up, where if people see that there are a lot of cyber attacks happening, even if they don't actually result in a majorly impactful disruption, it could make people nervous and kind of sow that doubt.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, I want to talk about success for a minute from the attacker's point of view. How do they confirm that they've succeeded, and do targets ever deliberately hide that they've been breached?
Yeah, so in terms of deliberately hiding that they've been breached, it is a little bit different now in the US and the UK and several other places where there are requirements to disclose to authorities that you've been breached within a certain amount of time, usually like 48 to 72 hours. But say with website defacement and hacktivism, targets might have an interest to kind of hide that they've been targeted by an ideologically motivated actor, or with DDoS too, because it means admitting that they've been targeted for a political reason and an ideological reason. And these threat actors are trying to defame their targets and then call them out for something that they did that the attacker didn't like, and it could look bad. So if it's something like an environmentally motivated hacktivist targeting an organization, and they're targeting them because they're saying they wildly contributing to climate change and it's really bad, then it's not really a good look reputationally for the organization that's been hit. And so maybe they don't want to put out a press release saying, hey, our website was down for an hour because we've been accused of being climate criminals or something like that. They might want to hide that they've been breached. And there are other reasons to hide it too. But with those disclosure requirements, usually now, if you've been breached and had any kind of personal data that's been exfiltrated, you're usually required to notify authorities about it. But attackers usually, if they've succeeded in accessing an organization, they would know that they're in the networks. And success kind of depends on what the end goal is. So if the end goal is disruption, then it's kind of left up to interpretation, where maybe if an organization that was breached took systems offline because they were aware of the fact that they'd been breached, maybe that would be viewed as a success because they disrupted operations by bringing networks offline, even if they didn't cause a water tank to overflow and lead people to 1,000 people who rely on a local water municipality to not be able to get water for an hour or two. Maybe that would be a higher level disruption or a more tangible disruption than just taking systems offline. But I think attackers and success, it's kind of left to interpretation, where it's in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah, I can see that for sure. In those situations where attackers are caught in the act, like, and it's very obvious, what tends to happen next? Do they just give up and go home? Do they change their approach? What have you seen as the typical outcome there?
It depends on how important the target is for them. If they're caught in the middle of a cyber attack, they're probably not going to try and continue to target them immediately, especially if they go ahead and organizations will usually take systems offline to prevent that deeper intrusion that would give the attackers access to critical systems. They want to protect that, and they want to protect the cyber attack from spreading. So they'll usually take their systems offline, and then they'll try and collect evidence on them, and maybe they'll definitely alert law enforcement, and then it can lead to an investigation. But it wouldn't deter cyber criminals from necessarily carrying out cyber attacks on other targets, especially if they're being opportunistic and casting that wide net, seeing where they can get in and who they can extort. If they're carrying out ransomware attacks, they're still going to carry them out. Maybe they'll try again on this specific company if they want to, if it's really a high net worth company and they think that they have a good position to extort them and get a high ransom amount from them. They might try and target them again, and they could even use the same vulnerability if it worked last time. But if they're casting a wide net and it's opportunistic, then they would probably just rely on those other targets that they are also going after. But if it's a nation state actor and they're really trying to get into a specific network for the purpose of conducting espionage, it's likely that they would kind of pivot, change their approach, try again.
Yeah, that makes sense. In sort of global cyber competition, do you think that most nations are spending the bulk of their time and their efforts building offensive tools or defensive postures?
So these go hand in hand, but it's definitely defense. It's just become such a necessity, especially for smaller powers where they're working with more limited resources. They're working with what they have. So they're more likely to spend on defense first and then work on building out those offensive capabilities later on if that's something that they're interested in. But more nations than before are investing in those offensive tools so that they could potentially project power into cyberspace, but it's still very specialized. And yeah, this is kind of my plug for our Beyond the Big Four series that we have on RANE, where we're exploring how middle power countries beyond Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, the Big Four, are using cyber. So if you look at Turkey, different GCC countries, Vietnam, some of these countries really are starting to invest more in cyber capabilities. And then you look at Israel, which is kind of a special case that's just really technologically advanced. It has an interest in using cyber to its advantage, using all the tools at its disposal to project power. It just has a really robust cyber arsenal. But more often than not, nations are spending more on defensive tools because they want to make sure that they're protecting their infrastructure first and foremost.
Yeah, I can see that. You would hate to be out there with a really strong offensive and then, no one is minding the store at home, for sure. Okay, we've talked a lot about implications to nation states and governments and things like that. Are there other real-world implications of cyber warfare for the average citizen, the average person?
Yeah, so we talked a little bit also about water supplies or energy grids, and that's kind of on a higher level. Like if you're maybe in the middle of a conflict or tensions are really high, and it depends on where you are, but that could be an avenue where average people could be impacted in an escalatory scenario. Or more likely, temporary disruptions to public services like transit systems or financial institutions are targeted a lot. So it was similar to those Israeli attacks against Iran. ATMs could be shut down. Gas prices could go up. That was also the case in Iran after an Israeli cyber attack too a few years ago. But also if you think about cases like Colonial Pipeline in the United States. And then businesses could also shut down because of disruptions. And so this could lead to financial losses that could be severe enough for organizations to consider layoffs. Or health services could be disrupted in some cases. Those are all kind of real-world impacts of cyber attacks that cause disruptions. But if you're thinking about data theft, identity theft is one where this kind of information could be sold on dark web marketplaces. Even if it's a cyber criminal that's been hired on behalf of the state might care a little bit less about U.S. social security numbers and what the actual cyber criminals are doing with that information, if their end goal is more disruption than data theft. So maybe then the cyber criminals would use that information and sell it on the dark web for their own operations and on their own behalf. But then also with espionage, if you think about one example, all the pushback against TikTok for data exfiltration, something that we don't talk about a lot with this is that it's a lot more of a risk to businesses than it is individuals. So a lot of times I hear people talking about how they don't really care if China knows what kinds of memes they like and stuff like that. And maybe you don't, but maybe you do have work information on your phone, and access to those apps could be used for reconnaissance and give information that would tell threat actors how to target your company to steal its intellectual property. And then maybe in the longer term, if it makes a specific product, then it would make it less competitive, which then if your company offers employee stock options, it could make the stock prices go down. So that's kind of another one of those ripple effects where one thing causes one thing causes another, but it is an impact on everyday people that is not talked about a lot, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Goodness, you painted quite a picture.
I mean,
okay, let's talk about AI for a minute. I don't think we can have a single episode go by where we don't talk about AI these days. And, we're hearing more about it speeding up both offense and defense. What are some of the most realistic offensive uses of AI in cyber operations?
Yeah, so there are kind of a lot of uses for AI in cyber operations. One thing we've seen a lot of already has been on the information operations front. So AI is really helpful at helping nation-state actors bypass the language barrier, whereas a few years ago, maybe you would see some fabricated article spreading disinformation, and it would be kind of obvious that it was a fake article or that a post or an account was fake because there are a lot of language or grammatical mistakes, and you can tell that this is clearly something's up with this account. But if they're posturing to be a specific person, but then it's not lining up. So now it's really easy to use ChatGPT or other AI tools to just ask it, write me a social media post that says XYZ, or write me an article that says XYZ. Oh, and then actually, why don't you build me a website where I can post this article and I can post that link to that website on my fake social media account. And then this is an AI avatar where it's existing solely for the purpose of influencing other people. So it makes those influence operations a little bit more credible. It makes them more widespread because they can also do all of this a lot faster than they could before. And that's where a lot of the discussion about disinformation came from in the first place in 2016, 2020, is that these influence operations are not a new concept for nation states. But what is kind of a new concept is that they're really cheap and easy to do when information is found online so often now. Instead of having to print out pamphlets and then physically spread those pamphlets in another country, you can just make accounts online and spread information that way. So we're seeing a lot of that AI usage in influence operations now, and then deepfake videos, deepfake audios, deepfake images, anything to make a narrative seem more credible, seem more convincing. But we've also seen other uses beyond just creating content, like China already is using AI to tailor its information operations and propaganda to specific individuals. So it's using AI systems to build profiles on people and then show them narratives that they personally are more likely to fall for or care about. And they're targeting high-profile individuals with this. So we've seen this deployed a lot regionally, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and domestically in China. But we haven't yet seen evidence of the actual operations being carried out and targeting U.S. populations. However, these AI systems do have profiles on U.S. policymakers, so it kind of shows that maybe they're considering using these tailored profiles and tailored information operations to target U.S. officials. And then beyond information operations, AI can be used for a lot of technical things. So automated reconnaissance, automated vulnerability scanning, like helping to improve your malware strains, helping them to evade detection. And then polymorphic malware is something that we've been hearing a lot about, and this can change its code and adapt to avoid detection. So that will probably be a risk that's going to be more important in the next year or two, because right now all of this is really in its nascent stages and it's all still developing, but it's going to be used more and more, absolutely.
We've heard about the AI arms race, and something that certainly experts are talking a lot about. How do you think that's going to play out over the next decade?
Yeah, so when I think about the AI arms race, I mainly think about it in regards to China and the US and as an economic component. So they're racing kind of for greater market share and to be the first in the race in terms of capability of models offered commercially. But it does also matter for government applications and defense and influence in setting global standards for how the technology will be governed, things like that. So when you think about military applications, they might be using it for intelligence analysis, autonomous weapons, enhancing those cyber operations, and then logistics and decision support, and then also drone swarms, surveillance tools. But the AI arms race, we're going to see a lot of export controls on semiconductors, algorithms, cloud infrastructure. I mean, we've already seen that a lot, but this is something we'd expect to continue as the US and China are just trying to prevent the other from getting ahead. Other powers like the EU, India, Russia, and Gulf states are also kind of scrambling not to be left behind in that race. Like inherently, when you're talking about it being a race, what that means is that sometimes this could make companies do away with guardrails or safety mechanisms, not think this all the way through, because there's the US emphasizing innovation, China's racing to integrate AI into its state surveillance systems. Everybody's racing to apply this. It could lead to a rush deployment and insufficiently tested systems. These are risks that have been flagged time and time again by AI safety advocates, but they're still really relevant. And those are kind of what I'm thinking about as the main risks for an AI arms race, but it's a loaded topic. I could spend a whole podcast about it.
All right, let's look ahead a little bit. Non-state actors have long been central in cyber incidents, but their role seems to have evolved in recent years, and we're seeing adversarial states teaming up with these groups for espionage, sabotage, even big cyber attacks. I want to hear from you in particular on that line between hacktivism and criminality in this shift and in this context.
Yeah. So hacktivism and criminality, with the exception of a few groups, like one group, Scattered Spider, who's been really dominating headlines lately in the cyber world. They're anarchy-driven. That's their nihilistic extremism. That's their ideology, even though they're cyber criminal. What separates hacktivism and cyber criminals typically is motivation. So hacktivism typically means that a group is ideologically motivated. They have a political or ideological reason for carrying out those cyber attacks. And then cyber criminals, first and foremost, those are always financially motivated. Even when they're hired by the government for their work, they're doing it because they're getting paid in some way. Even if it's in the form of immunity, when they're carrying out the operation, they're still getting paid. So that's the main difference between hacktivism and criminality, and that's where I draw the line. Is just it all comes down to motivation.
Okay. Looking ahead 5 to 10 years, what emerging threats should we be watching that aren't really getting enough attention today?
With this question, I always like to bring up quantum computing. One thing that I think about with quantum computing and that I think about with this prolific Chinese espionage campaign that we're seeing on a global scale is that a lot of times some of the stuff that China is stealing is encrypted information. And what are they going to do with that encrypted information? Except there's the harvest now, decrypt later risk. So what they do is they steal the encrypted information and maybe they don't use it because it would take forever to decrypt that. But with quantum computing up and coming, even though the timeline is disputed, anywhere from 5 to 30 years, we could see the capability to use quantum computers to decrypt standard encryption, but this is especially relevant for like long shelf life data. So military research, biometrics, nuclear command protocols, any sensitive information that could be also sensitive in decades is, I think, something to think about. Or just think about how data now, even if it's encrypted and you think that it's completely safe, might not be fully safe 10, 20 years from now. That information could be easily encrypted, and then it's going to take a really long time to actually roll out those post-quantum cryptography. The standards have been set, there are NIST standards on it, but it's going to take a long time to actually have that trickle-down effect where it's implemented on a larger scale. So I always bring up quantum computing. It's maybe a little bit alarmist because the timeline is so disputable, but I think it's really interesting and I think it's a relevant threat.
I think it's going to be the next major jump in computing that, AI, I think, has certainly been a jump for us. I think that quantum computing is going to be the next thing that we see that makes everyone scratch their heads a little bit, and as they try to wrap their minds around what exactly the capabilities are and the uses are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's going to speed things up exponentially. I always think about all of this hype around AI and all this focus on it and the risks. And sometimes I'm like, why are we even thinking about AI? What about quantum? Everything's going to be turned on its head all over again.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Hayley, as we come to the end here, where can people go to learn more about the work that RANE is doing, perhaps follow you and learn more about the work that you're doing? What would you like to plug today?
Yeah, so you can visit ranenetwork.com to learn more about our products. We've got a really active LinkedIn page that showcases a lot of our analysts' work and some of our own podcasts that we do, webinars too. And if you're interested in what I have to say, you can find me on LinkedIn, but I am much more active on Blue Sky.
Very nice. Very nice. Okay. Hayley, thank you so much for joining us today. This was a real treat.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was great.
It is now time for Ask One Password, where we answer your burning questions about security, privacy, and all things digital, and anything else you might want to throw in. From our last episode, we asked you to share your smart home tips in our community forum. Frequent listener SmartBoat shared some great advice, including notes on how to implement network segmentation in your home. We're going to link to his forum post in our show notes below, which we highly recommend checking out. Thank you, SmartBoat, for sharing those thoughts. Now, on to this week's question, which comes from Jamie. Jamie asks, is 1Password really better than my Mac's built-in iCloud keychain? Interesting question, Jamie. Rue, thoughts?
This is a great question, Jamie. And honestly, it's one that's kind of come up often throughout the years in some form or another. So Apple, the latest incarnation of what you're asking about, of iCloud Keychain, is now called Passwords. Apple now has an app called Passwords that's integrated well into the system, and it's sort of the front face of iCloud Keychain. And the thing I want to lead off with is that I want everyone using a password manager, regardless of what it is. By default, just pick a password manager and use it. Like, finding a way to stay safe online and a password manager being one of the easiest ways to stay safe online is something that everyone should do. And Apple bundling password management into the operating system in this way, into all of the operating systems in this way, is great for awareness, and it gets people set up by default with something that helps make them safer, which is great. All of that being said, is 1Password really better than the built-in iCloud keychain or built-in passwords app? Yes, 1Password is better. Obviously, there's a lot of bias on this side of the microphone for sure, but really push us into that realm of being better than the baked-in apps here. First of all, 1Password is fully cross-platform. So if you have anyone who is outside of the Apple ecosystem, you've got maybe folks who have Android devices, or you've got Windows machines and things like that, 1Password integrates seamlessly and provides a really beautiful user experience across all of these platforms. The other thing is that 1Password was really built with sharing and family members and teammates and things like that baked into how we've built the product. And so it's incredibly easy to take things that you would normally want to have access, other people to have access to, and share it amongst your family, share it amongst a small group of individuals. The other thing, and I think that this is sometimes overlooked is where you go beyond password management into some really wonderful use cases. So we've got full support for, of course, passwords, but then you get credit cards, you've got contact information, you get into social security numbers, all sorts of private information that you can store in 1Password that makes it a lot more than just a password manager. It's a spot to keep your entire digital life and have it secure. I can't tell you the number of times that I have reached for some piece of information that I know was stored somewhere and just thought to myself, it's in 1Password. Like, I can guarantee that this is in 1Password. This last year, we added the ability to tag things with location, and we had a huge public response just to this one small feature that we rolled out. And I've used this myself. One of my wife's family members lives in an apartment complex. She has 2 door codes in order to get into the complex. Both of those are stored in 1Password, and I have them geotagged with the location. I can just pull it up, and as we walk up to the apartment complex, and I can walk right in because I have the codes that she gave us. It's all stored right there. I know where it is. I don't have to remember it. These types of examples, like, I can just go on and on and on. All of this goes way beyond password management and gives you this really incredible vault to store all of these things. Beyond all of that, you get some really nice extra features like travel mode, which lets you temporarily remove sensitive data. If you're a developer, we have a huge suite of development tools, including our SSH agent, which just makes signing your code and everything else a breeze. It's really, really fantastic and far more secure than what even comes baked into the systems regularly for doing that type of work. So, in short, use a password manager by default, but then also use 1Password because it's the best.
I think that's really the best advice there, Rue. Like, base layer of everything, use a password manager. If you're only having an iPhone and you're only browsing on Safari, maybe Apple Password is just what you need, and that's everything, and that's fine. And as long as you're making the safe choices online, I'm a happy camper. But if you've got some different devices, or you're trying to share with family members, you're trying to use it at work, there are other solutions out there. And, again, bias definitely on this side of the mic. 1Password's awesome, and it's going to be able to do what you need it to do. So it's just a matter of making sure you are making smart choices.
My favorite thing about 1Password at the moment is dates and the ability to add notifications on them. I constantly had my car servicing in my calendar, and it wasn't next to the access to the tool that I booked it on, and I kept on forgetting where I would book it. And so I just added a date to the login and like a reminder for it. Oh, such a good feature.
It's very cool. The other thing is that we made some real strides just in the past year to prevent lock-in. So we've always had the ability to export your information and pull it into a different password manager or put it somewhere else. There's now a push for an industry standard that we have adopted, Apple has adopted, other password managers have adopted, that allow you to easily move between password managers. So if you decide to start on Apple Passwords and you find that you've outgrown it, you're not locked in. You can easily export that data from Apple Passwords and bring it right into 1Password seamlessly and just pick up where you left off. So it's really a great time to not feel locked into wherever you happen to be at the moment.
Well said. And that brings us to the final part of our show. Yes, it's time once again for our favourite security guessing game. It's Hack or Hoax. Yeah.
Definitely need the jazz hands.
Okay, here is a quick refresher on how it works. Each episode, we bring you a strange but possibly true tale from the world of cybersecurity. It could be an actual hack that pulled off straight from the headlines, or it might be something that Anna came up with after too much coffee. Your job is to figure out, is this a real cybersecurity incident, or is it a complete fabrication? Is it a hack, or is it a hoax? Alright, let's get into it. At DEF CON 2019, the infamous hacker conference in Las Vegas, one cybersecurity researcher decided not to wait for the conference floor to stir up trouble. Instead, they turned the flight home into their own private experiment. Somewhere between Dallas and Vegas, at 35,000 feet, the researcher pulled out a modified Android phone, rigged with custom firmware and a tiny rogue femtocell, essentially a fake cell tower. The goal? Well, see what nearby devices would whisper when they thought no one was listening. Most passengers had their phones in airplane mode, or so they thought, but quite a surprising number of devices still emitted passive signals, quietly reaching for the networks or syncing delayed texts. The rogue femtocell caught it all: metadata, phone numbers, message timestamps, no content, but enough to sketch a chilling map of in-flight digital behaviour. No alarms were raised, no flight attendants intervened, just a plane full of passengers blissfully unaware that they'd become part of a live cybersecurity demo at 500 miles per hour. The researchers shared the findings days later during a DEF CON lightning talk, ending with one warning: airplane mode isn't privacy mode. Is this a hack, or is it a hoax?
I like this a lot. I really like this a lot.
Yeah. There were a lot of big words that I don't understand. So I feel like I want to say hoax because I don't understand the big words. What's a femto tower? Is that what you're saying? Femto tower?
I said femtocell, which is essentially a fake cell tower.
Femtocell?
Is that FEMTOCELL?
Yes.
Okay, let's just do a real quick look for this here.
Oh, I didn't realize people were allowed to Google for the answer.
I'm just Googling a definition here. I'm searching a definition. A very small mobile phone base station which is connected to a phone network via the internet, typically used in areas where the mobile signal is weak. Oh, okay, cool. Neat.
Interesting.
I'm going to say this is true. This is a truism, a truity. This happened.
Okay. And Sarah?
I'm going to go with hoax just because it was 2019, and that's 6 years ago. So I don't know if the technology was as good or if airport security was as, it's starting to get a little bit more like you can wear your shoes when you go through TSA. So I don't know if they would have been able to get such a device on, or if it would have just been a backpack full of stuff and it doesn't look like it. So I'm going to go with hoax, but I'm thinking I'm wrong. So we'll see.
Oh, so it is a hoax.
Oh,
it's
damn
fake.
it.
It is inspired by real femtocell research, but this flight exploit never happened.
That's too bad.
It's a pretty good one, though.
That's too bad. It's really good. I could totally see this happening.
The question is good, right? Is airplane mode privacy mode?
Yeah.
And for all those people that don't ever turn their phones off, you hear them. The phone hits the plane ground, and then all of a sudden around you in the plane, ding, 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 ding. And it's like, there's no way you're that fast turning off your airplane mode, guy. Like, yeah. So what is your phone sending out?
So I do think airplane mode does turn off the cell antenna. So like that maybe should have been a clue when Matt said that, but because it does indeed. But otherwise, airplane mode today still allows for Bluetooth and Wi-Fi to be connected.
Which is a pain when you're trying to play those free games. Without ads.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, that was a good, I liked that one. That was a good one. I think there's a lot of real stuff that was pulled into making that one. So good job, Anna.
Yeah.
I think that was a solid hoax. Nice work. All right. Well, with that, thank you all so much for listening. And a big thanks again to Hayley for coming on the show. You can follow Random But Memorable on our new YouTube channel. Just search for Random But Memorable and watch all of our YouTube shorts over there. And if there's anything you'd like to discuss from this episode or ask any questions, head on over to onepassword.community. We would love to hear from you. Thank you as always.
I'm looking at the YouTube channel now. I haven't been on there before.
Oh, it's really good.
It's good.
I'll tell you what was weird was being on YouTube and seeing a clip of myself show up on YouTube, like in my
recommended what's next?
I was like, the hell is going on?
You're all over it. Look at this.
You can look at my weird face.
I'm taking a few screenshots. Yeah.
Thanks.
God, there's some meme-worthy material in there.
Oh my God,
I think we're going to have to run a caption contest on some of these.
Thanks. Great.
All right. Love you both.
Love you both.
Yes. Love you both. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for tuning in this week. If you're enjoying the show, we'd love it if you could subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also leave us a rating or review. It's one of the best ways to support the Random But Memorable podcast, and we always enjoy reading your feedback. We're also a community-led podcast, so if you have any questions for us to answer in Ask One Password, topics, requests, or even guests that you'd like to hear from, please send us a message to podcast@onepassword.com. We read all of your comments and look forward to hearing from you. We hope you join us next episode for plenty more random moments in the world of cybersecurity.